So this is a bit of a touchy subject for lots of people, maybe even including me. But I think it's something that needs to be discussed. And it starts with a bunch of articles that are either discussing or discussing with or written by, or I guess press releases by various people who manufacture gaming materials. And the hardest hit ones being board games, because all board games, for the most part, okay, maybe not all, the vast majority are made in China. And a lot of the printed materials nowadays are also made in China. And about probably around 10, 15 years ago, I started hearing this thing of nothing is made in North America anymore. I don't know about Europe. I don't know what the, manufacturing is like in Europe. But I mean, I've heard there's quite a lot of manufacturing in Eastern Europe, that Eastern Europe is kind of like, not the industrial heartland, because that's still probably Germany. And there's probably a lot of industry in France. But the Eastern Europe is sort of an area for Europe to enjoy a financial scale, a scalability because of lower wages, lower costs, that sort of stuff. So therefore they can make stuff cheaper in Eastern Europe than they can in Western Europe. Much like, I guess, you can make stuff cheaper in Eastern Canada, sort of. It's not really the same in the States. Things are actually, I think, more expensive in the Eastern United States, and they started moving industry to the South, to North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, even Louisiana, and and a little bit west as well. I mean, Ohio and Kentucky and Illinois were already kind of industrial themselves. They were kind of like the secondary industrial zone. Anyway, my point is that I'm not fully aware of the industrialization of Europe and, the manufacturing potential of most of the places in Europe. Obviously, the Industrial Revolution started in England and spread from there. And of course, the United States became the greatest industrial power until Nixon went to China. And then the Soviet... Okay. Not going to edit that out. That light was asking for it, okay? Don't worry about the light. Anyway, then, the Soviet Union fell and China opened up its economy, and Shenzhen province mostly became the special economic zone, and the Hong Kong, when it was turned over to China, was to be the special freedom zone, and we saw how that turned out. Anyway, Shenzhen is this economic hub of activity, mostly industrial. And for a long time, the world has used Shenzhen as the place to make stuff, because lower wages, lower costs, but really those lower wages and lower costs have been diminishing in the 30 years that we've been doing this, because wages have increased in China. And while they manipulate their currency and to allow for, I guess, a competitive edge, they can't stop the economic progress, because they want their 7 to 11% growth, and that includes wage growth. So I think at some point, maybe even before 2016, maybe after, I don't think that the cost of making something in China was that much lower, or even lower at all, than doing it in North America. What was certainly true about China is that in that, I guess up to 2015, from 95 to 2015, so 20 years, they had created an amazing little system that made Shenzhen a boutique, so that anyone making anything in the world could interface with, I guess consultants would be the word, and basically outline what it is they want to make. And these consultants would then be experts in which companies made what, and would be able to present to them several companies with competitive, bids or estimates on what the cost would be, and then they would be able to sort of pick which one they wanted to use based on maybe samples, or maybe the samples would come afterwards. The point is that they would be able to go to a central place and figure out who could make the thing they wanted to do. Now, in North America, this isn't a thing. We are sort of trapped in a 1950s economy in some respects when it comes to industry. The best we've got is directories, like, yellow pages, but I think they're blue pages, or, basically company directories that offer very little information on the specifics of what a company does, maybe the broad general stuff, and then every company is not necessarily listed in these directories. Now, there's some government software that has every single company, and it's coded to a specific type of industry, but I'm not sure how that factors in integrated companies that that are in multiple industries or multiple sub-industries or whatever. But the point is that even that is limited to a general specification, like not even makes drill bits, makes tool products, right? So does it make drill bits? Does it make screws, wrenches, that kind of thing? You'll have to find out by calling them. And that's one of the problems, is that then you have to call a whole lot of companies. And that's only if you have access to the government program. The reason I know about it is because I was a headhunter back in 2002, 2003, and we used that to find companies that were competitors to the company that we were trying to hire for. And because why not find the people that work at their competitors to hire? That's kind of what a headhunter does. Anyway, that's why I know this thing exists, but it's terrible. It doesn't tell you much, right? And then the internet comes along, and the paper directories become online directories, which at the very beginning probably had a lot of relevant information, but as time went on, that relevance started to erode because these companies weren't necessarily updating their profiles on these things. Many who wanted to have a competitive advantage online, but many probably weren't. And then, of course, I think 90% of companies probably made a website in the 90s, but now I would say it's well under that for anyone upkeeping their websites. Like you could look up a company, and I don't have a specific example. I've just seen this many times where you look up the company, you Google it, and you find a website, and not even on the first page, and it's not a generic name, like it's a very specific name. And somehow other things are on the Google page when they before it, when they really shouldn't be. And then you go to this website, and on a good day it's a WordPress site. On a bad, on a lot of them, on many of them, it's something that was made in the 90s, and it looks like it. Like, it's pretty crazy, the archaic websites these companies still. I don't know that you necessarily need to take them down, but they don't put your best foot forward in 2025 to have a website like that. And then others are broken links, or companies have a non-existent website. They never got around to having a website. They might have some other social network presence, but often not that either. And maybe the employees might have their own social networks, and they talk about their company, and that might be the only way to find out this company exists. So the point is that not only is there not a central system like in China where you can find the thing that you need, but to find the thing that you need in North America, you need to basically go on a quest. And dig through everything. And maybe there's some consultants you could hire to do that for you, or maybe there's some industry experts, but then you've got to figure out who those people are, because I've never seen advertisements for those kinds of people, and I've never seen those kinds of people even on YouTube. In fact, I bet you if someone started a YouTube as a company finder, they would probably be quite successful. So it's not that things are cheaper or that we're not making things, because I've mentioned before, I'm a truck driver. I've been to a lot of companies. I've been to probably every single kind of company you could imagine, and I can assure you that people are making things in North America. And while maybe there's less factories or manufacturing sites or service industries than there used to be, because of how the global trade expanded and moved outwards from North America into other parts of the world, there's just a lot of people making a lot of stuff, and many of them, if not most of them, have room to expand and could hire people and do the thing that you're looking to do. I mean, as simple as a book. Like, it's ridiculous that anyone would suggest that books can't be printed in North America. There are a ton of printers. Maybe not to the level of, like, if you took the number of printers that were available in the 90s and then extrapolated the expanse of the economy, maybe there's less than there should be, but they exist. And this idea that they don't is ridiculous, and I push back on that. There was someone who was doing a Kickstarter, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, and said that, you know, the reason they can't get an American printer, because I guess the people that were backing the Kickstarter were like, well, why don't you you know, print in America? And they're like, well, it's not possible. They don't print in America. And it was a ridiculous thing that I pushed back on. And then the discussion, you know, kind of continues with board games, because it is more complicated to do a board game than just make a book, right? There's the printing of the board is, and the instruction booklet are really the only printing you're doing, and then you're making the pieces, which require tool and die. But, you know, where did tool and die really start, and where was its, you know, peak? It's in America. And while I'm sure the Chinese and definitely the Japanese are pretty great at tool and die at this point, the Americans are, as far as I can tell, still the leaders, if not in size or scope or, you know, money. That they may be leaders in that, I don't know, but I mean in capability, because it's kind of in Americans' blood, kind of like making cars, kind of like I watched the movie, what was that movie with Matt Damon, about Shelby or whatever. And I remember turning to my nephew when he went to meet the Italians, and I said to him, like, it's cute that they thought they can make a better car than Americans, because Americans are really good at making cars, and they have been for a long time. Other people are good at making cars too, but I would bet on Americans for cars. Anyway, that's going out of the scope of this. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of facilities that do tool and die, and they don't do tool and die for board games. But the idea that somehow the tool and die they are doing is inferior to the tool and die you need to make a meeple, that's a pretty silly idea. So what I'm saying is that it is and always was possible to make board games in North America, and I think that it's highly likely that you could do so at a reasonable price, if not equivalent to the Chinese capabilities. And then you would avoid a lot of the problems that come with manufacturing in China before even now. And those problems were delays and missed delivery dates, and, you know, just basically, you know, things happen and things shut down for holidays or other reasons are that that somebody in North America wouldn't necessarily be aware of. Those things happen in China, and then that delays the product, and you've made plans for it to come out at a specific time, and not doing so may be more costly. And then also it comes from a slow boat, and the slower the boat, the cheaper it is to cross the water. So, and then also you don't necessarily get the first boat. You're putting it on a cargo container, and you're trying to figure out where you're slotted in. And again, that's another boutique process, I think, where you're dealing with logistics companies. But anyway, the point is that it's difficult, even before now, to have made a product in China and get it to here exactly when you wanted it to. And then there's also some issues with quality, not all the time, just there's, obviously you go to the cheapest and you're going to get the quality of the cheapest for the most part, but there's no accountability in China. If someone, gives you inferior quality and passes it off, and it seems at first that it's great quality, there's not much recourse. Like, are you going to court in China to take someone to court? How much does that cost? Or is there any possibility of you winning if you're a Westerner? I'm not sure that's true. So there's the ease of getting scammed in China. That's another cost. And not many people talk about that. So maybe it's not a major issue, but it's enough to drive up costs. And then just misunderstandings, linguistic and cultural misunderstandings, and their boutique process probably has a lot of fluent, speakers of various languages that are able to interface with the system, but some things do get lost in translation. So I think that the cost is not, it may have been way better 15, 20 years ago. It may have been enough to do that. And then because of that, the Chinese ramped up their central system of whatever this boutique process is, and they became masters of it, and we have nothing comparable to it. And it's just so easy to do what you need to do. And so these companies maybe became complacent, lazy, or just believed that that's the only way to do it, and didn't investigate. And some companies have said that they've looked into this and they've tried to do this, but I don't know how deeply they did. Did they go to every company in South Carolina to try and figure it out? Did they go to every company in Massachusetts to try and figure it out? Did they go to every company in Colorado to try and figure out whether they could make this thing? And just the idea that you can't print books, that's ridiculous. You can't make dyes of meeples, preposterous. And so I just think to myself that this could have been solved years ago, to move the manufacturing to something that's local to where you are. Like, why add the difficulty of having to communicate across the sea with people maybe you'll meet once, you'll go to China, you'll do a little meet and greet and that kind of thing. But I'm not even sure that by the time the process is done, that your product is made, that those people are still at that company. Who are you? Like, I would think that it's just better to deal in person with people that are close to you. And then you don't have to deal with all of the issues of delays and when is this thing going to deliver. Because there's a lot of games that, they say they're coming out this day, and then months go by and that day is passed and it doesn't happen. And how much does that cost? How much hassle is that? And how many people who are interested in the game now lose interest, right? Now, the price of not having done that is 125% at this point. And so the idea that, basically you have to more than double your costs, and then you have to, by the end of the time it gets to retail, that thing now costs more than double what it used to, when, I think it would have taken 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year to find an alternative source. And didn't you have that much warning, if not more? Because, I don't know, so someone has been talking about this stuff for a long time, and whether you believe in it or not, and whether you think it's a good idea or not, I mean, there are some people who think it's a good idea, and then there are some people who think it's a terrible idea, and then there's some people who have no idea because the world has gone crazy for a long time, and things that used to be truisms are no longer truisms. But does that matter? Like, this was coming, and maybe you thought to yourself, oh, it's never going to happen. They're just saying it. But what if they're not? So I don't like the idea that companies shut down and lay people off and can't make the thing they make, especially when they make things that I love, because I want them to keep making stuff because they're good at it. And there's nothing to celebrate about things failing on this level. I mean, if people make things that aren't good and that nobody wants, then yeah, whatever, that company shouldn't exist. They're just wasting everyone's time and resources and that sort of thing. It's just sad that, you could have just hired someone for 3 to 6 months to find alternative sources, but instead everyone just believed this myth that you can't make anything in North America. Nope, no sir. Meeples are too hard. It just reminds me of some of the recycling facilities I went to in Oregon, and having read a bunch of these articles about how, you can only recycle 20% of things, or that only a certain percentage of things are, can be then resold once they're recycled, that basically that it's not financially feasible to recycle 80% of plastics. And then I go to these facilities in Oregon after 2016, and I see them recycling every kind of plastic. And then I ask them, I'm like, I thought you could only recycle 20% of plastic. And these old hippies are like, nope, all of it. And I can sell all of it. And then I realize in my own head what's going on, that we sent recycled materials, or I guess garbage, but plastic garbage, to China, thinking, what makes sense? Recycle this stuff and then use it in the stuff that you're making for us to send back over, and this will improve efficiency and your costs. But instead, that stuff just gets buried, and eventually they decide they have too many landfills and they're not taking any more plastic. So then the plastic returns to North America, and these old hippies fire up their recycling facilities again, and they just go at it. And then we get a bunch of articles saying that you can't recycle most things. And we're told a lot of things that turn out to be truisms, and truisms turn out to often be not true. It's just something we want to believe because someone we think knows stuff told us that. We don't actually know. And granted, I don't run a recycling facility. I just went there and talked to people who do. Maybe they're full of it, and maybe I'm wrong about all this, but I don't think I am. I think that we fall into these habits, and we shouldn't fall into these habits, because then the world goes crazy and your habits will bury you. So that's my advice, and it's not even really advice at this point, because you could do something about it now so that at least in the future you're not continually screwed. But the time to do something about this was yesterday, and the day before yesterday, and months ago, and years ago. So hopefully you guys can get yourself out of this, and hopefully something happens in which these issues are settled and agreed upon and negotiated, and then we can go back to doing business. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Have a good day.